They told me I was old the moment I stepped through my own doorway. You don't need comfort anymore, Mary Ellen. Older people sleep anywhere. That was the first thing I heard before I even set my purse down. And if you think a 74-year-old woman can't freeze in the middle of her own living room like a scolded child, well, I froze. Because something in Greg's tone, gentle on the surface but firm underneath, told me I was about to learn a truth I was never meant to see. I had come back only for 2 nights in the hospital. Nothing dramatic, nothing life-threatening. A routine observation, the kind doctors order when they don't want to say that age makes them nervous. I'd packed light. Toothbrush, robe, the paperback my husband once bought me at a gas station. And all the way home, I imagined lying again on my soft mattress, the one Harold insisted we buy 30 years ago, because a woman who works as hard as you deserves a bed that doesn't argue. But when I walked down the hallway toward my bedroom, I stopped so suddenly my breath tangled in my throat. The room was empty, not tidy, not rearranged. Empty. My bed frame, gone. My mattress, gone. My nightstands with their worn corners and the little lamp Harold fixed 3 times, gone. Even the old rocking chair where I kept my knitting basket. Steadfast things. Familiar things. Pieces of a life that had stayed with me longer than most people. All that remained was the outline of the rug. A faint rectangle of untouched carpet where my bed once stood, like the imprint of a body that had vanished. I must have stood there a full minute before I heard Alana's heels behind me. She always walked like someone announcing herself. We needed the space, she said, as if we were discussing boxes in a garage. Your room was underused. Underused. My bedroom. My space. The only corner of this big, aging house that still felt like mine since they'd moved in temporarily 4 years ago and stayed permanently without ever quite admitting it. Where is it? My voice surprised me. Too calm, too steady. I expected a tremor. I didn't give them one. Oh, she said, flipping her hair like a schoolgirl. We sold it, most of it. A couple from the lakeside community took the whole set. We gave them a good price. It helped cover the renovations. I turned to Greg then. My son. The boy I taught to tie his shoes, to cook scrambled eggs, to speak softly when people were hurting. He stood with his hands in his pockets, eyes on the wall just above my head, the way he always looked when he didn't want to see what he'd done. Mom, he said, you're 74. You shouldn't be sleeping on a soft mattress anymore. It hurts your back. You're better off on something firm, and you don't need all that furniture. It's clutter. We're simplifying your life. Simplifying, as if my life were a drawer they'd opened and found untidy. I stepped further into the room, the sound of my shoes hollow against the bare floor. Even my quilt was gone. My hands had stitched every inch of it the winter after Harold died, when grief made my nights long and cold. You should rest in the guest room, Greg went on. The sofa there is perfectly fine. For someone your age, comfort isn't a priority. Stability is. Stability. The word tasted bitter. I looked at my son, really looked at him, and for the first time I saw not the man he'd become, but the distance he'd grown. It had been building for years, small things I smoothed over because mothers do that. But standing in that stripped room, with its echo instead of warmth, I realized smoothing over had turned into permitting, and I had permitted far too much. I reached for the windowsill, not because I needed support, but because I needed the feel of something solid under my fingers. something that hadn't been taken from me while I lay in a hospital bed, believing my home was waiting untouched. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I didn't ask why. I simply stood there in the silence of my missing life, feeling the floor steadier than the people who'd decided they knew what an old woman did and didn't deserve. And that was the moment, quiet, almost invisible, when something in me began to turn. I stood there longer than I should have, in that hollow space where my life used to sit. Not grieving the furniture itself, no, but the way its disappearance seemed to peel back something I had been refusing to look at for years. You don't lose your bed by accident. You lose it because someone believes they have the right to take it. Alana was already checking something on her phone, tapping fast, impatient, like I was a slow-moving inconvenience she had to get through before dinner reservations. Greg hovered in the doorway, shoulders stiff, eyes restless. Neither of them stepped into the room, as if the emptiness they'd created might cling to them. "Mom," Greg finally said, "don't make this into a big thing. You weren't using half of this stuff, and with the way your back has been hurting—" "My back," I repeated quietly, just to hear the words aloud. "Greg, when did you decide you knew more about my body than I do?" He sighed, the way he used to sigh as a teenager when he thought I didn't understand anything. Funny how people grow older, but keep their old habits ready in their pockets. "It's not about that," he said. "It's about practicality. The room was cluttered, and we need a workspace we can actually use. With the new project coming up, I'll be working from home more. The house has to function. For all of us. For all of us." That phrasing was not accidental. "This is my house," I said, not raising my voice, not even changing its rhythm, just placing the fact between us like a stone. Greg's jaw tightened. He glanced toward the hallway, knowing Alana was close enough to hear, but not close enough to intervene. "Mom, we talked about this. You said we could make the place more efficient. You said you trusted us." "I said you could repaint the pantry," I answered. "Not sell my bed." Alana finally stepped in then, her voice light and bright, as if she were addressing someone whose mental grasp she questioned. "Mary Ellen, the old furniture wasn't doing you any favors. Honestly, you should be thanking us. That room was outdated, heavy, oppressive. We're giving you a safer, simpler life." Safer. Simpler. Words people use when they want to shrink you. I walked past her into the hallway, the smell of fresh paint lingering from whatever project they'd started without telling me. Pictures that used to hang crooked, Harold always hated straightening frames, were now perfectly aligned. A row of decorative baskets I'd never seen before sat on the console table. My home had been tamed into something that looked like a magazine spread belonging to someone else. "Where are my things?" I asked. "Oh," Alana said casually. "Some were donated, some thrown out. The quilt, well, it was really worn. We figured—" "You threw it out?" My voice didn't rise, but something sharp cut through it. "It had holes," she said, not meeting my eyes. "It wasn't sanitary. Older fabrics collect dust." Dust. As if grief had an expiration date. I went into the guest room. The sofa sat against the wall, narrow and stiff. The kind of thing you perch on during short visits, not sleep on for entire nights. A thin blanket was folded at the foot, the pattern unfamiliar. "You'll get used to it," Greg said, leaning against the doorframe. "It'll be good for your posture, and we'll have the office ready in a week. You'll barely notice the change." But I already noticed every inch of it. My body might have been 74, but my mind was sharper than either of them remembered. They were counting on my silence, the same silence I'd given them for years while I helped with bills, groceries, little emergencies that somehow kept becoming bigger ones. "Why now?" I asked quietly. "Why do this while I was gone?" Greg exhaled heavily. "Because you would have argued. You're sentimental. We needed to make decisions quickly. Mom, sometimes we have to do what's best for you even when you can't see it." There it was, the sentence people use when they want the moral high ground without earning it. Alana softened her voice in that sugary way she thought sounded caring. "We love you, Mary Ellen. But you're getting older. Comfort isn't the priority it used to be. You don't need a lot of things. Too much softness makes people dependent." Dependent? On what? On a bed? I looked at the two of them, my son with his nervous shifting, my daughter-in-law with her polished smile, and felt something inside me settle. Not anger, not yet. More like the cold edge of understanding. They weren't doing this for me. They were doing it for themselves. I nodded slowly, not agreeing, just acknowledging what was now unmistakably clear. "I see," I said. And I did see. More clearly than they imagined. I spent the rest of the evening sitting in the guest room, my hands folded in my lap, listening to the house breathe differently around me. Harold once said that a home remembers its owner. But standing there, in that borrowed corner of my own life, I realized something else. A house can forget you too, if you let others speak louder than you do. And somewhere deep inside, a faint, steady thought began forming, like the first outline of a decision I wasn't quite ready to name. That first night on the guest room sofa felt like a punishment no one had bothered to name. They didn't say the word, but it hung around me anyway, like a thin, cold draft you can't quite find the source of. The sofa had no give to it. My hip bones pressed straight through the cushions, and every time I shifted, the springs whispered their complaint. I lay there staring at the ceiling, thinking how strange it is that a woman can live in a house for 40 years and still end up feeling like she's trespassing. I wasn't angry yet. Not fully. Anger needs a shape, a boundary. But what I felt then was raw, like a bruise forming under the skin before the color rises. Mostly, I felt foolish. Foolish for assuming that because I loved my son, he must love me with the same steadiness. Foolish for believing that kindness is its own receipt, that people remember. The house sounded different at night now. When Harold lived, the walls carried his habits, the soft drag of slippers, the occasional hum under his breath, the slow closing of doors because he never liked the noise. After he died, the silence became part of my routine. A companion, not an emptiness. But after Greg and Alana moved in, the silence changed again. Their presence had a sharper rhythm, laughter that didn't need me, arguments that didn't include me, plans discussed in quick, low voices in the kitchen while I pretended to read the newspaper. Tonight, though, their voices drifted faintly from the far end of the house. The tone wasn't angry or apologetic. It was practical, as if today had been nothing more than a small inconvenience they wanted to file away before bed. At some point, I must have dozed off because I woke with a jolt, my neck stiff and my lower back screaming. The blanket had slipped to the floor. The wind rattled the old maple outside. I sat slowly, letting my joints remember their purpose. A 74-year-old body doesn't forgive cold surfaces easily. I stood and walked toward the hallway. Not because I needed anything. The truth is, Loneliness makes you walk without purpose sometimes. The house was dim, the lights in the living room already off. The hallway toward my former bedroom felt longer than usual, as if distance had grown overnight. I paused at the doorway of the empty room. Moonlight fell across the bare floor, settling where my bed used to be. Without furniture to anchor it, the space looked larger, but not in a way that invited breathing. It looked abandoned, like a room waiting for someone else. Someone younger. Someone more welcome. I stepped inside and let my fingers trace the air where the footboard once stood. It was ridiculous, I suppose, touching emptiness like it was a memory you could feel. But age does something strange to time. It makes the past sit just 1 inch behind you, ready to lean forward the moment you turn your head. In the corner, Harold's rocking chair had left a faint mark on the floor, just a shadow of varnish rubbed away by years of gentle movement. I haven't let myself think of that chair in a long while. He used to sit there with the mail spread on his knees, reading each letter out loud because he knew I liked the sound of his voice more than the contents of the envelopes. "You spoil that chair," I used to tease him. "It's going to fall apart before you do." And he'd grin that quiet grin of his. "I'll fix it," he'd say. "I always fix things." But he didn't fix his heart. No one could. I knelt slowly, not because I wanted to, but because I needed to see the floor up close, to touch the worn spot where years of his weight had shifted the wood. My fingers brushed the faded mark, and for a moment I felt him there, the way you feel warmth from a stove long after it's been turned off. They'd thrown the chair out. I knew it without asking. It would have been the first thing Alana called oppressive, the word she uses for anything that carries history. I stood back up, slower this time, holding on to the windowsill for balance. My breath felt thin, not because of the loss, but because of the realization forming behind it. This wasn't just about a bed or a quilt or a chair. It was about erasing the parts of the house they didn't value, and that included the parts of me they found inconvenient. I walked back through the hallway, careful not to make the floor creak. Old habits, being considerate, being quiet, linger longer than the people who instilled them. When I reached the kitchen, I poured myself a glass of water. The faucet sputtered once before settling, a sign Harold would have fixed immediately. Greg never noticed those things unless they affected him directly. I leaned against the counter, the cool surface pressing into my palms, grounding me. There's a point in every long life when you understand that waiting for people to see you is a kind of slow death. Tonight, as I stood barefoot in the kitchen I once ruled with confidence, I finally understood it. I wasn't going to let them shrink me to the size that suited them, not all at once, not loudly. But something in me had opened its eyes, and once a thing wakes, it rarely goes back to sleep. I turned off the kitchen light and went back to the sofa, the cushions rising stiff under me like a reminder. Morning would come, and with it, clarity. Sleep didn't heal anything. It rarely does at my age. Morning simply revealed what the night had been hiding. The stiffness in my back, the dull ache in my neck, and the thin thread of humiliation still humming under my ribs. I sat up on the sofa, pulling the blanket to my shoulders, and waited for my body to settle into itself. The sun hadn't fully risen yet, but the house already felt awake in that restless, impersonal way it had taken on since Greg and Alana moved in. I went to the kitchen to make tea, though even my kettle didn't sound quite right anymore. Its whistle used to be sharp, impatient, almost cheerful. Now it sputtered in a tired, uneven wheeze. The lid had been replaced recently. I hadn't asked for that either. Small things like that pile up until one day you look around and realize half your life has been updated into something that doesn't carry your fingerprints. While the water heated, I sat at the table and reached for the notebook where I kept my bills, passwords, and account reminders. A habit from the years Harold and I ran everything ourselves. Back then, money came in slowly and left quickly, but we knew every dollar by name. We respected the work behind it. Greg and Alana didn't grow up with that kind of discipline. They talked about money like it was a seasonal thing, here in spring, gone by autumn, back again in summer, as if it grew on decisions, not effort. I opened the notebook and flipped to the last section where I kept my bank summaries, a simple list written in my own hand. But right under my handwriting were printouts, pages Greg had brought me months ago, saying he wanted to help organize my finances. Help. I should have known then. On the first printout, I saw something I'd ignored before, a recurring transfer every second Tuesday, then another, and another. $450, household expenses. $380, family groceries. $600 utilities overflow. $275, vehicle maintenance. Then a larger one, tucked near the bottom, $100, temporary loan assistance. I sat back in my chair, letting the numbers settle. I had approved these once, out of trust, out of instinct, out of habit. Greg had always explained them quickly, smiling, almost embarrassed. Just until next month, Mom. But next month had turned into a year, maybe two. It wasn't the amounts that struck me. It was the pattern. They'd been leaning on me so long that they no longer saw it as leaning. They saw it as structure. I kept flipping through the pages. There were car insurance payments, Greg's, not mine. Alana's online courses, which she had called Investing in the Family's Future. A subscription for some luxury delivery service, which I had certainly never used. Even small things, dry cleaning, pet grooming for the dog they insisted on adopting, home decor orders that now sat around the house, replacing the dowdy little knickknacks they said made the place feel elderly. I traced my fingers over each line, remembering how easily I'd handed over my card when they were short on something. I'd always believed generosity between family didn't need an explanation. But generosity without boundaries becomes something else, an invitation to take without noticing. By the time the kettle wheezed itself into silence, I had gone through a year's worth of expenses. There was nothing malicious on those pages, nothing criminal. But there was a quiet greed, the kind that doesn't roar, it creeps, it assumes. I poured the tea slowly, watching the steam curl up. My hands didn't shake. That surprised me. Usually, when I felt wounded, my body betrayed me. But not today. Today, my body felt steady, as if some part of me had been waiting for this clarity. Footsteps sounded down the hall. Greg's. His walk had changed since he moved in. More self-assured, like a man walking through his kingdom. "Morning, Mom," he said, rubbing his eyes. "You sleep okay?" I didn't answer the question. Instead, I tapped the stack of printouts on the table. "Greg, can you remind me when we last talked about these?" He blinked. "About what?" "These recurring payments." His face shifted for just a second, the way faces do when they haven't prepared a story yet. "Oh, those. Yeah, that's just the household system we set up. To keep everything flowing. It's easier if it comes from one place." "One place," I repeated, meaning me. "It's temporary, Mom." He smiled at me, soft, reassuring, the same smile he used as a boy when he tried to hide a broken vase. "We'll pay you back when things stabilize. You know that." But I did know something now. Just not what he thought. I pushed the papers back toward him. "I'm sure you have a busy day," I said. He nodded, relieved I hadn't asked further. After he left the kitchen, I sat there a long time, staring at the doorway where he'd stood. The sun was higher now, lighting the worn grain of the table where Harold once did our taxes. I wasn't angry at the money. I was angry at the assumption behind it, that I was the one expected to give, to adjust, to bend. I finished my tea and closed the notebook gently, like a door I would not be opening the same way again. I didn't make any decisions that morning, not out of hesitation, but because decisions made in the heat of humiliation are rarely the ones that last. I spent a long time at the kitchen table, watching the sunlight move across the floorboards, thinking about how much of my life had been spent smoothing the rough edges of other people's choices. Maybe that's normal for mothers. Maybe it's a kind of instinct. Take the burden, lighten it. Make the path easier for the people you love. But somewhere along the way, that instinct becomes a habit, and a habit becomes a pattern, and a pattern becomes a trap you built yourself. I cleared the table, washed my teacup, and folded the dish towel exactly the way Harold used to like it. Little rituals help steady the mind. And though I didn't yet know what I would do, I knew one thing clearly. What had been taken from me would not be returned by asking. I went to my purse, pulled out my phone, and scrolled to the number I rarely used, the direct line to my branch manager at the bank. I'd kept that number only because Harold once said, "Always know the name of the person watching over your money." For years, I never needed it. Then Greg and Alana moved in, and I told myself it was still good to have. The phone rang twice before a bright, professional voice answered. "Good morning, this is Sandra speaking." "Hello, dear," I said, keeping my tone warm but not fragile. Women my age are expected to sound fragile, and I've learned how quickly people take advantage when you do. "This is Mary Ellen Harper. I have a question about my accounts." "Of course, Mrs. Harper. How can I help?" "I'd like to review all automatic payments and transfers," I said. "Every single one. And I'd like them suspended effective immediately." There was a short silence. Surprise, not disapproval. "All of them?" "Yes." "I'll need to verify a few details," she said, her voice careful now, respectful in a way that told me she understood this wasn't a light request. After the verification, she cleared her throat. "All right. I see a large number of recurring payments, some of which appear to be tied to your son and daughter-in-law's accounts or household services. Are you sure you want to suspend everything?" "Yes," I repeated. "Temporarily, for now." "Not a problem. I'll put a universal hold." "Nothing will go out today?" I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. "Thank you, Sandra. I appreciate your help. If you'd like to review them in person, I can make you an appointment," she offered. I almost said yes, but I wasn't ready for anything official, not until my mind fully settled. "I'll call back when I'm ready." After we hung up, I set the phone down and placed my hands flat on the counter. My fingers felt steady. My heartbeat, even. It was the first moment of actual control I'd felt in days. When I walked back into the hallway, I saw a sliver of my empty bedroom through the cracked door. The walls looked pale in the morning light, stripped of personality. I closed the door quietly. That emptiness wasn't going to define me. I took the notebook with the printouts and tucked it into the drawer of the small writing desk in the living room. Then I went outside to breathe. The yard looked the same as always, overgrown in the corners, stubborn weeds pushing through the stones near the porch. Greg had promised to clear them last year. Promises, it seems, are easier than follow-through. The cold air sharpened my thoughts. I stood on the porch for a long time, letting the quiet settle. My neighbors' houses were still, their windows bright with morning routines. People lived their lives without knowing how close some homes were to cracking open. By the time I went back in, I felt calmer, ready. Greg was in the kitchen when I returned, rummaging in the fridge. "Hey, Mom," he said without turning around. "Can you pick up groceries later? Alana needs a few things for dinner." I stood there for a moment, watching the easy entitlement in the curve of his shoulders. There was no shame, no hesitation, no awareness of what he had done or what he had taken. He didn't see me as someone who might have limits or choices. "Not today," I said. He looked up, surprised. "Why not?" "I have things to take care of." "Like what?" He smiled as if the idea were amusing. "I don't owe you a list, Greg." The smile faltered. "Mom, we're all trying to make this household work. You know that." I nodded once. "I do know. That's why I'm going to make sure it works for me, too." He stared at me, confused, but I didn't stay there long enough for him to ask questions. Instead, I went to the guest room, grabbed my coat, and left the house without another word. Walking down the driveway, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not anger, not fear, but a quiet resolve. The kind of resolve a woman gains only after years of being overlooked. A resolve that doesn't need to shout. I wasn't sure exactly where I was going, but I knew what I was walking toward. My own life returned to my own hands. I didn't walk far. My knees aren't what they used to be, and the cold morning air has a way of reminding me that bones keep better records than the mind. But the law office was only 4 blocks from the house, on a quiet street tucked between the library and the old pharmacy. I'd passed it hundreds of times without ever thinking I'd need anything from behind those glass doors. The receptionist looked up as soon as I stepped inside. A young woman, too young to understand the weight of decisions made after 70, but polite enough to recognize this wasn't a social visit. "Good morning," she said gently. "How can we help you today?" "I'd like to speak with someone about property rights," I said. "Preferably someone familiar with household occupancy laws." Her eyes sharpened just a bit. She understood more than her age suggested. "Do you have an appointment?" "No," I said, "but I can wait." I didn't have to wait long. 10 minutes later, I was sitting in a small office across from a man in his late 50s, with kind eyes and a posture that suggested he listened more than he spoke. His nameplate read, J. Howard. He folded his hands on the desk. "Mrs. Harper, what can I do for you?" It would have been easy to start with the dramatic pieces, the empty bedroom, the discarded furniture, the long list of financial drains. But age teaches you to begin with the bones of the matter. Everything else is just flesh around it. "I own a house," I said plainly. "It is in my name alone. My son and his wife live with me. I allowed it, temporarily. They have begun making decisions in the home without my consent. Major decisions." He nodded, not interrupting. "They removed my personal belongings, sold my bedroom furniture, cleared out items that belonged to my late husband without asking, and they believe they can do more." His expression didn't change, but something in the way he leaned forward told me he'd heard a similar story before. Maybe not the same details, but the same root. "Do they contribute to the mortgage?" he asked. "There is no mortgage," I said. "The house was paid off 20 years ago." "And they contribute to taxes?" "No, I pay everything." Utilities? I pay those as well. He nodded slowly. Then legally, they are occupants. Guests, essentially. Not co-owners, not tenants, not partners in any binding agreement. I let that sink in. I already knew it, but hearing it stated without hesitation steadied something inside me. Mrs. Harper, he continued, no adult child or relative has the right to alter, sell, or remove property from your home without your consent. Unless you've signed over ownership or created a joint estate, your house is yours. Entirely. I felt my fingers unclench on the armrest. You said they sold your furniture, he added. Did you give permission in writing? No. That is a violation of your property rights. He said it calmly, the way a doctor says a diagnosis he's delivered many times. But even in its calmness, the truth hit hard. He pulled out a folder and slid a few papers toward me. You have several options. The first is simply reestablishing boundaries verbally. But based on what you've described, I suspect that will not be respected. I didn't argue. The next option, he continued, is issuing a formal written notice requiring them to vacate the property within a specified time frame. 30 days is standard. My heart didn't race. It didn't stutter. It simply settled, as if it had been waiting for this sentence. And if they refuse? I asked. He shook his head. They have no legal grounds to refuse. If necessary, we can file a formal motion, but in most cases, a written notice and follow-through are enough. I looked down at my hands. They rested quietly in my lap. My wedding band, Harold's band, resized to fit me, gleamed faintly under the fluorescent light. I remembered how proud he'd been when we'd paid off the mortgage. This house is yours, he'd said. Promise me you'll never hand away what we built. I had forgotten that promise. Or maybe I had set it aside under so many softer instincts. The attorney's voice brought me back. If you'd like, I can prepare the notice for you this afternoon. I nodded once. Yes, I believe I'll need that. Of course, he said. You're doing the right thing, Mrs. Harper. Protecting your home is not selfishness. It's responsibility. Responsibility. A word that had followed me my entire life, but never quite in this direction. I left the office with the papers in a simple white envelope, nothing dramatic. Just a modest package containing the first real boundary I'd drawn in years. Walking back home, I felt the weight of it in my coat pocket. Not heavy, just certain. I didn't hand them the envelope that same day. Even certainty needs a quiet corner to settle in before it's spoken aloud. Instead, I placed it in the drawer of the writing desk, my desk, one of the few pieces no one had dared to update, and let the evening approach on its own terms. The house felt unusually still, as if it too was waiting to see what I would do next. By late afternoon, the scent of onions and garlic drifted from the kitchen. Alana never cooked when she could avoid it, so I knew this was her attempt at appearing domestic, maybe even generous, as if scent alone could soften the edges of what she'd taken. I walked into the kitchen to get a glass of water. She glanced up, her smile practiced and bright. Hi, Mary Ellen. I'm making pasta tonight. Greg said you might not be feeling well, so I figured something light would help. People like Alana always talk about kindness as if it were a performance. Something you do in front of an audience, never in the wings. I feel fine, I said, reaching for a glass. Oh, good. She stirred the pot, wrist bent elegantly. I was worried after yesterday. Big changes can be hard on anyone. Anyone. But we both knew she meant me. Greg walked in then, loosening his tie, already halfway through some cheerful comment I didn't care to hear. When he noticed me, he softened his voice. "Mom, we didn't really get to talk today. You left in a hurry this morning." "I had things to take care of," I replied. He leaned against the counter, casual, comfortable, completely unaware of how much he'd lost standing there. "If it's about the bedroom, Mom, we can explain. You don't need to be upset. We're trying to help you." I watched him talk, my grown son, confident in his reasoning, believing wholly in his own intentions. I used to admire that confidence. Now I saw something different. A man who had forgotten the difference between helping and taking over. "What part of selling my belongings was meant to help me?" I asked. He blinked, caught off guard by my directness. "It wasn't. Mom, it was practical. We needed the office. Your things were old, and honestly, it was time to declutter. You always get overwhelmed by too much stuff." Alana chimed in, her voice honeyed. "We were thinking of your comfort, Mary Ellen. Older people sleep better on firmer surfaces. There's research on it." I looked at her, at the immaculate hair tucked perfectly behind one ear, at the measuring spoon she held like a prop. "If you wanted to help," I said quietly, "you would have waited for me to come home. Or asked." Greg sighed, already slipping into that tone that assumes reason belongs only to him. "Mom, you can't take everything personally. You've been emotional lately. It's normal at your age. We're doing our best." Emotional. At your age. People use age as a shield for their own guilt. I set the glass down on the counter and faced them both fully. "I don't need you to manage my emotions, or my house." Greg frowned. "Mom?" "I've looked through the bank statements," I continued. "The automatic transfers, the subscriptions, the expenses." His shoulders tensed, just slightly, but enough. "Oh," he said, forcing a smile. "That. Mom, those are household things, shared responsibilities." "Shared usually means both sides contribute," I said. "Not one." Alana's spoon clattered louder than necessary as she set it down. "We thought you trusted us." "I did," I answered, "and I'm learning how far that trust went." For a moment, no one spoke. The steam from the pot curled toward the ceiling, the only movement in the room. I felt strangely calm, as if the softness in my voice carried more weight than any raised tone ever could. Finally, Greg pushed himself away from the counter. "Look," he said, choosing each word carefully, "we know you're feeling unsettled. But this is still your home, Mom. We're not trying to push you out. We're just trying to make it livable for everyone. We're a family. Families adapt." "Yes," I said. "They do." He seemed relieved, misreading my tone entirely. Alana glanced at him with a small nod, as if they'd just won some small negotiation neither realized I hadn't entered. I walked to the doorway, pausing long enough to look at the two people who believed they understood the situation. "I'll join you for dinner," I said evenly. "After all, this house is for all of us. For now." Neither of them heard the last two words the way I meant them. But that was all right. Some truths don't need to be understood immediately. They just need to be spoken. I didn't sleep much that night either, but the wakefulness felt different. Not the ache of humiliation anymore, not the tightness in the chest that had sat with me since the hospital. This time, it was a steady, quiet sorting of thoughts, as if someone inside me had finally turned on a light and begun sweeping the corners. By morning, the house was still. Greg had left early, as he always did on days he wanted to avoid real conversations. Alana was on the phone in the living room. speaking softly, the way people do when they think. Whispering makes their intentions more noble. I stayed in the kitchen, letting her words fade into background noise. I opened the writing desk again, the one old piece of furniture that still felt like mine, and pulled out a box of loose photographs. I hadn't touched them in years. Life has a way of pushing memories into drawers until they become more of a burden than a comfort. But today, I felt the need to lay them out, to remind myself that my life didn't begin here, under this roof crowded by someone else's decisions. The first photo was of Harold standing in front of the house the day we bought it. The paint was peeling then, the porch crooked, the lawn wild, but he stood there like it was a palace. "It'll be ours," he'd said. "Really ours. A place no one can push us out of." I held that picture a long time. His face had lines even then, but they were lines etched by work and pride, not disappointment. I remembered how we painted those porch railings together, one long summer, both of us ending up with white streaks on our knees and elbows. We laughed the whole time, not because life was easy, but because we shared the weight of it. Next was a picture of Greg as a little boy, sitting on Harold's shoulders, reaching for apples in the tree out back. His face was round and joyful, nothing of that grown man hardness in it yet. I wondered when exactly he stopped looking at me the way he did in that photograph. When the distance began. Whether it had been gradual, or whether I'd simply missed the signs because I wanted to believe closeness was permanent. Photo after photo, the years passed under my fingertips. Birthdays, quiet dinners, Thanksgiving meals, Harold laughing so hard he had to wipe his eyes. A lifetime of small, steady moments, and every one of them reminded me of something I hadn't let myself acknowledge. I was a whole person long before Greg needed anything from me, and I would be a whole person after. I put the photos aside and opened the small drawer where Harold kept his personal things. Most of his belongings were gone, moved, misplaced, discarded in some quiet, careless moment after his death. But in that drawer was his old brass money clip, scratched along the edges, and a folded sheet of paper with his handwriting. It wasn't a letter, just a line he'd written once when the house repairs overwhelmed me. "Don't give away your strength, even when you mean well." I traced the words with my finger. They felt like a reminder sent from a part of my life that had refused to die. I stayed at the desk for a long time, letting the memories settle. Not to brood over them, but to remember the version of myself who once stood firmly in her own home, on her own feet, with her own judgment. When I finally stood, it was with a certainty I hadn't felt in years. Not anger, not defiance. Something quieter and stronger. The kind of strength that doesn't announce itself. I put the photographs back into the box gently, one by one, as if I were placing stones to anchor myself. By the time I closed the drawer, I knew this much with absolute clarity. I had spent too many years shrinking myself so others could stretch comfortably, and I wasn't going to keep doing that. Not in my own house, not in my own life, not anymore. The next day, I returned to Howard's office, not because I doubted my decision, but because decisions of this weight deserve to be carried out cleanly. A woman my age learns to respect clarity more than comfort. Comfort is fragile. Clarity endures. He greeted me with the same calm expression as before, as though nothing I might say could surprise or disturb him. It was a nice change from a household where every quiet truth was treated as an inconvenience. "Mrs. Harper," he said, "I've drafted the documents we discussed. Before we finalize them, I'd like to walk you through each step so you understand exactly what authority you have." "I understand," I said, "but please explain anyway." He appreciated that. You can tell when a professional is relieved not to be dismissed. He slid a stack of papers toward me, thick enough to look official, thin enough not to overwhelm. "This first section," he said, tapping the top page, "covers your rights as sole owner. No occupant, relative or otherwise, may alter the property, remove belongings, or claim authority over household decisions in any legally recognized capacity." "That much I figured out on my own," I said quietly. "Yes," he nodded, "but it's important that it's stated formally. It gives you a foundation." Foundation. Something I hadn't felt in my own home for a very long time. He turned to the next document. "This is the notice of termination of residency. You're giving them 30 days to vacate. It establishes a timeline and removes any ambiguity." I studied the page. My name was there at the top. Not Greg's, not Alana's. Mine. Seeing it in print felt unexpectedly grounding. "They may accuse you of being unkind," he added, "but you're within your legal rights, and kindness does not require tolerating disrespect." I nodded. "I know." He didn't rush me. He let me read each page slowly. I liked that he didn't treat me as fragile or confused, the way Greg had started doing lately, as if age had made me incapable of understanding my own affairs. Funny how people assume forgetfulness fits all older women like a coat handed out at a door. When we finished the paperwork, Howard folded his hands. "There's another step you may want to consider," he said. "Oh?" "A living directive for property control. It outlines what happens to your house if you become temporarily unable to make decisions. It ensures no one can step in and take control without your explicit written consent." I thought about that. About hospital rooms. About how easily people speak for you when you are not in the room to stop them. About how quickly convenience turns into authorization. "Yes," I said. "I'd like that." He prepared the document while I sat quietly in the chair, letting the silence become part of my strength instead of a void. When he handed it to me, I felt a sensation I hadn't known in months. Security. Not safety given by others, but safety returned to myself. As I signed the final page, he looked at me with something like respect. "You're doing this with a clear head," he said. "Most people wait until they're desperate. You're early. That's good." "I've spent most of my life being early," I said. "I just forgot that applied to protecting myself, too." He slid all the documents into a large envelope and placed it in front of me. Light, but not light. "Paper isn't heavy, but consequences are. When you're ready," he said, "serve the notice. They don't need to sign anything. You simply need proof they received it." Proof. I'd always been the kind of woman who kept receipts without ever expecting to use them. Now I understood their purpose. I stood, thanked him, and left the office. Outside, the wind had picked up, stirring the early leaves along the sidewalk. I held the envelope close to my chest, not to protect it, but to feel its shape, its promise. Halfway down the block, I stopped, looked back at the law office door, and reminded myself of something I should have remembered years ago. A woman who survives 74 years does not lose her power. She only forgets she still has it. I waited until late afternoon to give them the notice, not out of fear, those days had passed, but because timing matters. People hear truth differently depending on the hour. Morning makes them defensive. Evening makes them dramatic. But late afternoon, that's when the day has worn them down just enough to let reality in. Greg was in the living room, hunched over his laptop, surrounded by a mess of papers that looked suspiciously like work he could have done elsewhere. Alana was arranging throw pillows with that sharp impatience she often hid behind polite smiles. When they heard my steps, neither looked up at first. It struck me how normal that had become, my presence registering as background noise. I stood in the doorway until Greg finally glanced over. "Hey, Mom?" "We were thinking about repainting the guest room, something softer since you're staying there now. Maybe a beige." Alana nodded as though they were doing me a favor. "We want it to feel cozy for you." Cozy, a word people use when they're taking away something larger. "I have something for you both," I said. My voice must have sounded different because Greg straightened, cautious. I held out the envelope. Clean. Thin. Clear. "What's this?" he asked. "Read it," I said. He opened it. His eyes moved slowly across the page, then faster, then stopped. He read it again, as if repetition might change the meaning. "What is this supposed to be?" he asked, voice tightening. "A formal notice," I said. 30 days for you and Alana to relocate." Alana snatched the second page from the envelope, scanning it. "You're evicting us?" "I'm asking you to leave my home," I corrected. "You have 30 days." Greg stood abruptly, the papers shaking slightly in his hand. "Mom, this is insane. We live here." "You stay here," I said. "You live on my income, in my space, under the assumption I won't object. I'm objecting." He ran a hand through his hair, the gesture he always used when he felt things slipping out of his control. "We're a family. You can't just throw us out." "You sold my bedroom," I reminded him. "While I was in a hospital bed, you removed my belongings. You made financial decisions using my accounts. You didn't treat me like family." Alana stepped forward, her voice trembling, not with fear, but outrage. "You're overreacting. We were organizing your life. You don't understand how hard it's been to keep this house functional." "This house was functional before you arrived," I said, "and it will be functional after you leave." Greg shook his head. "We don't have anywhere to go." I met his eyes. "That isn't my doing." "Mom, this is cruel," he snapped. "No," I said. "Cruelty is taking advantage of someone who trusted you. This is boundaries." He stared at me as though seeing a stranger. People always do that when the person they depended on stops bending. Alana folded her arms. "You're going to regret this. You're not thinking clearly." I felt strangely calm. I've never thought more clearly. Greg's voice dropped. "After everything we've done for you." "What you've done," I said evenly, "is remove my comfort, my belongings, and my place in my own home. What I'm doing is reclaiming what was mine before you decided you knew better." Silence settled. Not dramatic, just heavy enough to reshape the room. I walked to the door, turning back only once. "You have 30 days. I expect you to honor the notice." Neither of them spoke. That was fine. I wasn't looking for agreement. I wasn't even looking for understanding. I stepped into the hallway and closed the living room door behind me. The sound was quiet, but it carried the weight of something final. For the first time in a very long time, the house felt like it was listening to me again. The unusual thing about taking your power back is how quiet it feels afterward. No triumph, no rush, just a steadiness, like a room that has finally stopped shaking. The morning after I gave them the notice, the house felt different. Not lighter. There was still tension in the air, but the tension belonged to them now, not me. I woke early, the way older bodies often do, and sat in the kitchen with my cup of tea. The clock ticked softly. The refrigerator hummed. Ordinary sounds. But Greg and Alana weren't ordinary that morning. They moved around the house with a stiffness I hadn't seen before, like people walking on a floor they no longer trusted. Greg came into the kitchen first. He didn't make eye contact. He poured himself coffee, then stood at the counter as if waiting for something. An explanation, a change of heart, any sign that the world was going to bend back into its familiar shape. I didn't offer him one. After a moment, he said, "We need to talk." I stirred my tea. "All right." He sat across from me. His voice was low, controlled. "We can fix this. You don't need to go through with the notice. Things got out of hand, but we can work it out." I looked at him for a long moment. Not the man he was now, but the child he used to be. Scraped knees, sticky fingers, trusting eyes. I knew that boy. I didn't know this man. "What exactly do you want to fix?" I asked. "The misunderstanding," he said quickly. "We didn't mean to upset you. We thought we were helping." "That wasn't a misunderstanding," I said. "That was a choice." He pressed his lips together. "It wasn't like that. It was exactly like that." He didn't argue further. When truth is spoken plainly, even the defensive run out of places to hide. Alana appeared in the doorway a few minutes later, dressed neatly, hair pinned back. She always dressed like someone expecting admiration. This morning, though, she didn't try to smile. "We should discuss logistics," she said. "If you're really going through with this." "I am," I answered. Greg shot her a look, but she ignored it. "Fine. Then we need time. More than 30 days. You will use the 30 days you have," I said. "The timeline is legal." She scoffed softly. "You think this is fair?" "No," I said, "but fairness stopped being part of this house long before yesterday." She didn't reply. For the rest of the morning, they kept their distance. Not out of respect, out of uncertainty. They were waiting for me to soften, to apologize for holding my ground. They didn't understand that something in me had shifted in a way softness couldn't reach anymore. I spent the day doing small things. Dusting shelves, watering plants, folding linens. Not because the house needed it, but because I needed the motion. Quiet tasks help clear the mind. And with every folded towel, every wiped surface, I felt my presence returning to the rooms they had quietly taken over. In the afternoon, I stepped outside onto the porch. The air was crisp, and a few early buds were forming on the hydrangea bush Harold planted years ago. It comforted me, the way older things do, the knowing that time doesn't erase everything, only rearranges it. From inside, I could hear Greg and Alana talking in hurried whispers. Their words didn't reach me, but their tone did. Frustration, disbelief, maybe even fear. I didn't feel satisfaction, just distance. The kind that forms when a truth finally lands where it should. I sat in the porch chair for a while, letting the sun warm my hands. I wasn't celebrating. I wasn't mourning. I was simply letting myself exist in my own space without shrinking for someone else's comfort. When I went back inside, the house felt a little more familiar. Not restored, restoration takes time, but quieter in a way that didn't wound. I walked slowly toward the guest room, passing the closed door of my empty bedroom. I didn't open it. Not yet. Some rooms need to wait until you're strong enough to fill them again. In the guest room, I pulled the blanket up over the sofa and sat down, letting the cushions press firmly beneath me. Still uncomfortable. Still temporary. But for the first time, temporary felt like a step forward. not backward. The house was silent, and in that silence, I finally felt like the one setting the pace. I waited 3 full days before opening the door to my empty bedroom again. Not because I feared the sight of it. Emptiness isn't frightening once you've lived long enough. But because some things deserve to be faced when your spine feels steady, not when you're still gathering yourself back into shape. On the 4th morning, I stood in the doorway and let the silence meet me. The room echoed faintly, a reminder of what had been taken without a second thought. But instead of the sting I felt the first time, there was something different now. An ache, yes, but also space. Space I could choose what to do with. I walked slowly across the bare floor. My shoes made soft, hollow sounds. I touched the wall where my headboard used to rest and imagined the faint indentation it had left over the years. Harold always said, "A room remembers the weight of the people who love it." Maybe the room hadn't forgotten. Maybe it had just been waiting. I sat down on the floor, my back against the wall, knees pulled close the way I hadn't sat since I was much younger. At my age, getting down is harder than getting back up, but I didn't mind. I just wanted to feel the grounding of the wood beneath me. Solid, dependable. Something they hadn't managed to sell. I stayed there for a long time, long enough for the morning light to warm the side of my face. Long enough to recognize that this room didn't feel lost to me anymore. It felt paused, like a breath held before a decision. Later, after lunch, I drove to the small furniture shop on Main Street. The same one Harold and I had bought our first real table from. The owner, Mr. Delaney, remembered me, though he tried not to make a fuss about it. "Looking for anything special?" he asked. "Something simple," I said. "Something that won't argue with my old bones." He laughed softly. "I think we can manage that." I tried mattresses the way younger people try new shoes, careful, uncertain, waiting to see which one felt like an invitation instead of a mistake. Most were too soft, like sleeping on warm bread. Others were firm enough but hollow, as if made for an apartment someone would leave in a year. Then there was one, medium firm, nothing fancy, no unnecessary layers meant to justify a higher price. Just a good, steady surface, the kind Harold would have approved of. I lay back on it, hands folded on my chest, staring at the ceiling tiles. It felt like something I could belong to again. In the end, I chose that mattress. A plain wooden frame, 2 modest nightstands, and a chair. Nothing like the old rocking chair I'd lost, but strong, with a slight curve in the back that fit me well. I didn't need to replace what had been taken. I only needed something that felt like mine. When the delivery truck came later that week, Greg and Alana stayed in their room. Whether out of guilt or resentment, I didn't care. The workers carried everything in politely, asking where I wanted each piece. I pointed. They followed. And just like that, the room began to fill again. Not with memories, but with possibility. That evening I made the bed with new sheets, smooth and cool, untouched by anyone else's hands. I placed a small lamp on the nightstand, a soft amber shade that warmed the room instantly. And for the first time in a long time, I stood in a space that looked toward my future instead of back at my past. When it was finished, I sat on the edge of the bed. The frame didn't wobble. The mattress didn't sink. The lamp glowed in a quiet corner like a promise whispered under breath. It wasn't extravagant. It wasn't impressive. But it was mine. Fully, unquestionably mine. And as I rested my palms on the new quilt I'd chosen, simple blue stitching, the kind of pattern you don't tire of, I felt something settle deep in my chest. I hadn't rebuilt the room to replace what they stole. I'd rebuilt it to remind myself that I was still here, still capable, still the woman who once filled this home with her own hands. The house had more to remember now, and so did I. Greg came to my doorway the morning after the new furniture arrived. He didn't knock. He just stood there, leaning on the frame, staring at the bed as if it were an accusation. I stayed seated, smoothing the corner of the quilt. I didn't feel the need to fill the silence. I'd learned that silence can tell the truth better than any speech. "So," he said finally, "you're really doing this." "I am," I answered. He stepped inside, hands in his pockets, shoulders tight. "Mom, this is all happening too fast. You're acting like we're villains. We were trying to help you, and now you're throwing us out because of a bed?" I looked at him calmly. "Greg, it was never about the bed." He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "Then what is it? What do you want me to say?" "That you understand," I said. "Not that you agree, just that you see what you did." His jaw tightened. "I don't think it's as dramatic as you're making it." I nodded slowly. "And that is exactly why you're leaving." He flinched, not visibly, but in the way his eyes shifted away from mine. "I apologized," he muttered. "No," I said. "You explained. Explaining is not apologizing." He ran a hand over his face. "I'm doing my best, Mom. Life hasn't been easy. You know that." "And yet," I said gently, "you wanted me to carry the weight of your choices. Quietly. Gratefully." His shoulders sagged a little. I had seen him defeated before, but this wasn't the same. This wasn't a man facing hardship. This was a man facing himself. "I never meant to hurt you," he said finally. "I know," I answered, "but you did. And you didn't stop. That's the part I can't ignore." The hallway behind him creaked. Alana appeared, arms crossed, chin lifted as if she were bracing for attack. "Mary Ellen, this whole situation has gone too far. We're a family. Families don't evict each other." I looked at her with a steadiness I hadn't felt in years. "Families also don't sell each other's belongings while they're in a hospital." She flushed, then tried to hide it behind indignation. "We were overwhelmed. We made a mistake." "A mistake is forgetting to buy milk," I said. "What you did was a choice." She shook her head, exasperated. "You're impossible." "Maybe," I said, "but it's my house, and my impossibility holds the deed." Greg put a hand on her arm, silently asking her to stop. She pulled away. "You're punishing us," she said. "No," I replied. "I'm protecting myself." For a moment, no one moved. The morning light reached across the bed, warming my hands. Behind them, the hallway seemed darker, narrower, as if the space they'd occupied all these years had already begun shrinking back to its rightful size. Greg's voice broke the stillness. "We'll start packing tomorrow." I nodded. "That's fine." He lingered one more breath, searching my face for something. Permission, forgiveness, the softness he was used to. I didn't offer it. Softness is wasted on people who treat it like weakness. They both stepped out of the room. Their footsteps faded down the hall. I stayed seated, fingers resting lightly on the quilt. It was the first time in a long while that they left a conversation smaller than they entered it. They began packing slower than I expected, not out of sentiment, but out of disbelief. People who assume ownership over things that never belong to them always seem surprised when the world reminds them of the truth. For a week, I heard the drawers opening and closing, the rustle of clothes being folded without care, the muffled arguments behind their closed door. Sometimes they went silent when I passed by, as if I were the intruder. I didn't correct them. Let a guilty conscience do its own work. I kept to myself. I cooked small meals, read in the living room, watered the plants. I didn't hover. I didn't interfere. Boundaries don't need to shout. They just need to exist. One afternoon, while I was sweeping the porch, I saw Greg carrying a box to the car. He paused when he noticed me. The wind tugged his hair the way it used to when he was a boy, but nothing boyish remained in his expression. "We found a place," he said. "That's good," I replied. "It's smaller," he added, almost defensively. "Most places feel smaller when you've been living in too much space that wasn't yours." He didn't argue. He just nodded, the gesture brief, almost grudging, but real. Later, Alana came out, arms full of shoes. She didn't speak to me, but she did look around the yard as if seeing it for the first time. Harold's hydrangea, the old bird bath, the bench under the elm. None of it had ever mattered to her. But people always start noticing things at the door of departure. Inside the house, the atmosphere shifted day by day. Rooms they'd filled with their noise grew quieter. The air felt less crowded. Their belongings disappeared from the bathroom counter, the hallway table, the kitchen shelves. The house was shedding them the way a tree sheds leaves at the end of a season, naturally, without resistance. On their last morning, Greg approached me in the kitchen. No excuses this time. No attempts to negotiate. His voice was low. "We'll be leaving around noon." "All right." He hesitated. "Mom, I know you think we used you." "I don't think it," I said softly. "I lived it." He closed his eyes briefly as if the truth stung more than he'd expected. "I didn't realize how much you were giving." "That's the thing about taking," I said. "It makes you blind." He nodded once, not in agreement, just acknowledgement. A small, heavy gesture. Alana didn't say goodbye. She walked past me with a stiff back and a box in her hands, her perfume lingering for a moment before fading into the hallway. That felt fitting. Some relationships end quietly, with nothing more than the air shifting behind them. When the door finally closed and their car pulled away, I stood by the window and watched the dust settle on the driveway. No relief, no celebration. Just a quiet release, like exhaling after holding your breath for too long. The house felt still, not empty, just returned to its natural size. My size. I walked down the hallway, past the room they had occupied for years, and opened the door wide. Sunlight fell across the carpet, brighter than I remembered. I ran my hand along the wall, not to claim anything, but to feel the foundation beneath my fingertips. A home always knows when the imbalance is gone. And standing there, in the doorway of a room finally free, I understood something simple and steady. Some departures are not losses. Some departures are restorations. The house was so quiet the next morning that I stood still just to listen to it. Not to the silence, I'd known silence before, but to the difference in it. Silence can bruise, or it can breathe. Today, it breathed. I made tea the way I used to, without someone reaching over my shoulder to adjust the stove or suggest a more modern kettle. The spoon clinked against the cup, steady and familiar. The window above the sink framed the yard in its early light, the hydrangea bush catching the sun on its edges. It looked almost like it had been waiting for me to notice it again. I walked down the hallway, touching nothing, just taking in the air. Their bedroom door was open now, the room empty, except for the marks left by their furniture on the carpet. Even those marks felt temporary, already softening at the edges. Absence does that. It fades faster than people expect. My own bedroom waited at the end of the hall. I opened the door and stepped inside, letting the light fall over the quilt, the small lamp, the new wooden frame. It wasn't the room Harold and I built together, but it held something important. Choice. My choice. Not an arrangement made for me, not a room cleared behind my back, but a space shaped by my own hands again. I sat on the edge of the bed. The mattress held me gently, firmly. No stiffness, no ache, just support. A simple thing, really. Comfort. But comfort feels sharper when you've been denied it. I thought of Greg then, not with bitterness, just with a kind of quiet clarity. Loving someone doesn't make them right. Raising someone doesn't make them loyal. And protecting someone doesn't mean you must let them take from you until there's nothing left. Alana would tell the story differently, I'm sure. People like her always do. Every boundary becomes hostility. Every no becomes betrayal. But stories change depending on who holds the pen. For years, I let them hold the pen in this house. I stepped aside. I softened. I yielded. It's easy to lose track of yourself that way. I looked around my room again, feeling the steadiness of the floor under my feet. "You did it, Harold," I whispered, touching the edge of the nightstand. "You built us something that lasted. And maybe I hadn't kept everything perfectly intact. Maybe I'd let parts of this home bend too far. But I'd bent too. And I was standing again now." In the afternoon, I went outside to sweep the porch. The breeze moved through the yard in slow strokes, lifting the edges of the leaves. Across the street, Mrs. Daniels waved from her driveway, smiling in that way only older women do, knowing, respectful, never prying. "I heard they moved," she called. "Yes," I said. "It was time." She nodded once. No judgment, just understanding. Women of our age recognize survival when we see it. When I went back inside, the house felt warm. Lived in. Mine. I walked through each room slowly, not to inspect anything, but to acknowledge it. Every corner, every doorway, every wall that had held me through grief and through joy, and through this strange recent season of being minimized in my own home. In the living room, I opened the curtains fully for the first time in months. Light spilled in across the floor, bright and unapologetic. I let it wash over my hands. I wasn't looking for a fresh start. At 74, that phrase sounds too much like a sales pitch. But I was ready for a rightful continuation. A life returned to its natural size, not squeezed down to accommodate someone else's convenience. I sat on the sofa, the one I'd slept on too many nights, and let the sun reach me. No rush, no fear. Just the simple knowing that dignity isn't loud. It doesn't need to be. It only needs to be claimed. And I had claimed it. If my story means anything, it's this. You are allowed to take back what is yours. Your space, your voice, your comfort, your life. And if you ever forget that, come sit with me a while. I'll remind you. If this story touched something in you, stay close. There are more truths worth telling, and more women who deserve to hear them.